Hi, friends. Welcome to the Passion and Purpose podcast with me, your host, Louie Giglio. The idea for this new season came from the recent release of my first ever 365-day devotional titled Grace and Glory. I've invited some new and old friends to join me in discussing how our daily rhythms of spending time with God and staying rooted in His Word can guide us as we use our passions to accomplish His purpose for our lives. Today on the podcast, I'm jumping in with longtime friend and leader, Max Lucado. Max is a phenomenal speaker, teaching pastor at Oak Hills Church in San Antonio, Texas, and the author of several best-selling books. And when I say several, I mean lots and lots and lots of best-selling books, including his newest release, What Happens Next. He's been a voice of encouragement to believers across generations. I know that I am one of them, and I believe this conversation will leave you encouraged about God's purpose for your life in a whole new way. So without further ado, let's dive into this episode of the Passion and Purpose podcast with Max Lucado. Well, welcome to the Passion and Purpose podcast, Max Lucado. I'm so excited to have you on today, and it's just great to see your face.
Well, Louie, this face of mine is kind of getting old and worn out, so I don't know if your taste needs to be corrected, but I'll take the compliment. It's great to see you too, my friend. Whenever I have the opportunity and I'm feeling a little in the doldrums, I know where to go. I go to the Passion YouTube channel, and I just watched that event. I've watched them all, and I watch and I listen to the music, and I can't remain in my seat. I find myself on my knees or my hands in the air. I've told you this before. I haven't told you enough, but the difference you've made in just that one, and I realize that's just one element of your ministry, but that one event annually is so life-changing, so invigorating. And I know you're especially loving on those young people, but you've got an old guy here who feels every bit as blessed. So again, that's just one of the many, many things you've done, but thank you specifically for that one.
Well, thank you, Max. It's been obviously quite a ride for us, and God has miraculously moved, and we're grateful just to be included in what He's doing. And I know you feel the same way. I respected you from afar for almost, I can't remember a time in my Christian journey where you weren't in the story. I'm sure there was a before Max, but then we got to know each other a little bit on some events that we were doing a few years ago, and I got to be around you, and oh my goodness, just to come to know the person that is Max Lucado, not the author, but the person, it really warmed my heart. You're one of the greatest people I've ever been around, wow. And it's just a real privilege to be close into your orbit in some spaces. So thank you for that.
I was in Manhattan just a couple of weeks ago.
Wow. Yeah.
Walked right past Madison Square Garden, and I immediately thought of, you know what I'm talking about, Worship Night in America. And I reminded Dina, my wife, I said, do you remember when Louie told everybody to get down on their knees and pray, and then you said something like, just pretend there's $100 bill taped beneath your chair. And just like that, everybody went down on their knees. Those were great moments. I immediately texted Chris and his team and said, what an amazing memory. But it's great. We've had those opportunities together.
So many incredible things happen in Madison Square Garden, but to be in a moment like that, Max, where, I mean, that place was jammed to the rafters with people hungry for God. And hungry to see God move in New York and in America and across the world and in their lives, and just to be in that space. And then, you see something on TV and you're like, yes, but I remember. You see a concert that happens in here, but I remember. Yeah. And I'm so grateful that God's let us be a part of moments like that. Max, I want to talk a little bit about anxiety.
Yes, sir.
We're obviously living in extraordinary times, and anxiety in all measure is through the roof. And tell me about your life. Let's talk about Max for a minute. What are the rhythms like in your life that allow you to stay hopeful and to stay purposeful, even though there's a tendency for everyone to freak out. I'll put myself in that category, including me at times, feeling like, what in the world is happening? How do you manage to stay hopeful through these uncertain times?
You're assuming I do. I have my moments as well. I have found about every 10 or 14 days I'll feel flat for 24 hours and just not much emotion. And
Wow.
I know when that's happening, I've overextended myself, and I've either spiritually neglected my soul, physically I often neglect my body. I don't exercise to the degree I used to, and I miss that. But so I guess I'm saying I don't always succeed. But on the days that I do well, Louis, I two tools really help me. One is presenting a detailed list of my day to Jesus as I begin the day. I did that today pretty well this morning. I on my couch downstairs where I pray, I said, Lord, I have this due by 10 a.m. I get to meet my brother Louie at 11 a.m. I have a meeting at noon. This afternoon, I've got this and this that I'd sure like to get done. Could you help me? And I kind of go through it. And then I try to pause, Louis, and say, is this right, Lord? Am I doing today
Wow.
what you want me to do? And is there a way to do it that honors you? And so that helps me. Because that way, for the remainder of the day, when I feel the stress, I can say, wait, I've given this to Jesus. I've given this to Jesus. It'll come out all right. It'll turn out fine. And then the other thing is a very practical, just kind of a time management tool, Louis. It's so 101, but if somebody's not using it, it could really help them. And that is to not only have a list of things you want to do, but to keep them ranked in order of importance.
Yeah.
Have them in a sequence. You know, you and I are all about messages, right, Louis? And there's the temptation to jump ahead and work on a message that's not needed for 3 weeks when I've not quite finished this coming Sunday. But I'll get excited about that one for mid-October when I've got something I need to get ready for 2 days from now. So I learned quite a while ago to stick to a sequence in order of when it's next needed, And I list that in my phone and just work my way down that list. And those two things have really helped me.
Wow, that's so encouraging. Talk a little bit about the longevity, Max. You know, this is one of the things that's obviously rising to the top in terms of value on earth, but particularly in the church, and that's people who have longevity, who have stayed in it. And I know for a leader like yourself, leading a church, you've been a teaching pastor and key leader at a church in San Antonio for decades and decades and decades, and you're still serving in that capacity in some way, shape, or form, and then you're doing so many other things. How have you morphed over time to handle, adversity and to handle the temptation to freak out? Was it different when you were younger, and now because you're older, there's some things you've learned along the way, or is it similar now as to then?
I will answer that question only if you will promise to give your answer to your own question, because I look up to you with the same. I would position you as among those who are finishing well, and that's an important thing, a very, very important thing. We have a lot to offer in our later years, and we may not have as much energy as we had, but we have better perspective, and we can speak from experience. So 2 or 3 things I think have helped me. One is that old saying, "Do the most what you do the best." I don't do well in budget meetings, managing staff. I did my share of it. I've paid my penance. And I'm at a stage now where I'm so thankful that I have moved out of that. Those are all in the hands of some very capable people who are much more gifted than I. And I like to urge people, you can't do that always. There's always going to be some things you have to do just because it comes with the job, but make it your aim to do the most what you do the best, and that's assuming you know what you do best, identify what you do best, and do that the most. And I think the other thing, if I've done anything right, I've really tried to succeed at home first. Realizing, Paul's admonition that if you're going to have an elder, he needs to be a one-woman man, and you could look at his kids as his first test of ministry. That's pretty direct teaching from Paul, and I take away from that, succeed at home first. I don't have a perfect home, but Deanlin and I have done well, going on 44 years now of marriage, and I'll say it's a happy marriage. It really is. And I have made some very deliberate decisions to stay home and say no to some very tempting opportunities, but I just didn't think that Deanlin was on board with it. And I've really tried to love my kids. Of course, my kids are in their 30s now, 40. I have one that's 40, so their lives they're all about their kids now. But those two things, Louie, have really helped me do the most what you do the best and try to succeed at home first.
I've said, Max, and I really kind of mean it, I've said it tongue-in-cheek a lot, but I think leading a local church is the hardest job on earth, because that pastor of a local church is waking up every day with a target on his back, and the gates of hell are coming against him. And some of the ways that he comes against us are through each other. It's people in the church, people on the team. It's disappointments. It's people leaving. It's misunderstandings. It's people getting their feelings hurt and saying things. And I know for me, early in the journey, I didn't take criticism that well.
Oh, yeah.
And I didn't handle those kinds of pressures. And I know that's one thing, I think, by the grace of God, that has changed from 40 to 66, that now I'm like, hey, I'm doing my best over here. God, I just want to put my heart in your hands again. I can't change this. I'm not in charge of this. I can't pull some levers and fix all this. So I'm going to just trust you, Jesus, with A, B, and C, be very specific, and that's normally a person. It's not a thing. And I'm going to go to sleep now because it's the end of the day, and I'm going to trust you're going to work it out. You're going to have your will. You're going to do what it is that you want to do. And I've talked a lot about it, but, I had a big mental breakdown some time back. And Max, it was all connected, I think, to becoming a local church pastor for the first time, and things that I could manage when I was leading Passion, this global movement, became very different when I was nose to nose with people that we were going to build a church together. And I realized that people's opinions and approval mattered way more than I was recognizing. And I realized that I had control issues, that I wanted to control stuff.
Yeah.
And I've said to people all the time, if you want to try to control something, then don't plant a local church. And if you've got approval issues, do not plant a local church. And God, by His grace, is helping me with those. I'm definitely not, haven't graduated from those two struggles yet, but I think they combined to be the last little push that pushed me down into that hole that I fell in. And so it's important, isn't it, that we remember that God is in control, and that is a big theme in your new book, that God is in control. We're not in control, but there is someone who is in control.
Just this morning, I was working on a message, not for our church, but for another church I'm helping out. And they've asked me to talk about, they didn't ask specifically this title, but after the conversation, it seemed to me the title would be When Leaders Let You Down.
Wow.
When Leaders Let You Down. And I reflected back over my years in ministry, and I've been let down, I looked up to certain In my case, they were men. There could be men and women, but in my case, there were some men who just really let me down. I probably had them on a pedestal too high. And in learning to walk through those disappointments of being involved in church life, and then the leaders of the church behave inappropriately. And we've seen our share of that, far too much of that, in the last few years. And I've found that to be another reason that local church work can be difficult. It could be, in my case, in those times, I was not the senior leader, but I was an associate on a staff and just was so brokenhearted. And I had to decide, Louie, am I following Jesus or am I following that person? And of course, if you had asked me before anything happened, I would have said, oh, Jesus. Mm-hmm. But I realized my loyalty was to a person. And that could be true, somebody's loyalties to a denomination or even to a particular point of view, and then they get let down. So we got to guard against that. But I think you're absolutely right. I think the church leadership within a church community is a different challenge for exactly the reasons you said. It's a spiritual battle every day. And then the other reason I'd add to that is our members are so vested in the work.
Yeah.
I mean, they're good people. And they have deep feelings and strong opinions, and they will let you know. We're not talking about what kind of beans are on the grocery store at the local market. We're talking about what church members want to see in their church, and sometimes their vision for the church and my vision for the church have been two different things, and those can be very, very hard conversations.
Yeah, I think Max, calling is so essential. I know it is for me. My calling to preach to my generation happened when I was in college, and I pretty soon after started working in my church in a very low level position, maybe the lowest level position that there was. But I was up close to leadership. I was best friends with our pastor's son, and so I was in their home a lot. I saw not only just the Sunday morning side, I saw Tuesday night side, the Saturday side, and I saw the good, and then I saw some of the bad. And even in my situation as a college student, a few things happened where I thought the favoritism went the other way, and I kind of got the short end of the stick. And I remember even as a 19, 20-year-old going, okay, church isn't perfect, and nobody's perfect, but I do know God called me to this. Mm-hmm. And that calling trumped disappointment, and it trumped maybe being passed over, and it trumped seeing somebody that had some chinks in their armor, not excusing that at all.
Right.
And it somehow has, propelled me. I got up, came to work today because there's a calling that I feel like is real. Talk about your calling, and when did you understand that God is choosing Max Lucado, and how is that sustaining you even today?
I'm so glad we're having this conversation. It's a conversation that needs to be had and happens too seldomly. And maybe the Lord has ordained our conversation today, Louie, to speak to some discouraged younger pastors. And so I'm thrilled that we're doing this. I agree with you. If you're not called, when I was thinking about entering the ministry, I went to a pastor of a church in the town where I was going to college, and I told him what I was thinking, and he gave me this answer. He said, unless you have to preach, don't.
Wow.
But if you have to preach, do. Isn't that a great sentence? I've never forgotten that. Lynn Anderson was his name. He's in heaven now, and he served faithfully up to the last day of his life. He said, if you don't have to preach, don't. And there is something, that fire in our bones, that we experience. I have to preach. I have to. And the church here in San Antonio, Louie, has allowed me to serve here since 1988. And if for some reason it was right for me to leave, I would accept it. I'll be grateful. It's not been without its highs and lows, but it's been a great time. Yet if they said it's time for you to move on, I'd probably take a 3 or 4 month sabbatical. But I know me, I'd say, Okay, who needs a preacher? Where can I go? I don't want to be in on your budget meetings, but if you need somebody on Sundays, because I have to, I just have to. It's what God called me to do, and so that calling is so powerful in ministry. It will be the rudder of the ship that will keep you afloat during those stormy times. And when you're terribly, terribly disappointed in a church, if your calling is to love young people, if your calling is to care for the dying, if your calling is to manage a church staff, then that calling will get you through. You just heed that calling. I felt it, like I said, first back in college. I became a Christian at the age of 20. And I was given an opportunity to speak at a youth event at our church, and it's nothing big. I bet there was maybe 15 kids there.
Yeah.
And so I'm not talking about any, honorarium was they gave me a gift card to a coffee shop. So, I mean, we're not talking about anything important. But I loved it. I worked so hard on that short message. And I remember to this day a young girl coming up to me afterwards saying, "That was really helpful." I have no clue what I said, but I do know that feeling that I had of thinking I connected with her on a deep level just because I prepared a message. And so that was when I began to sense I had a calling. And that calling it's that divine spark that keeps us moving forward. What about you, Louie?
Well, yeah, I think very similar. I was headed one direction in life, and then all of a sudden, that door closed, and in that little window of time, Max, the Holy Spirit, I believe, I would say now, I used to say God, woke me up in the middle of the night, and I mean, I don't know if heaven was in my bedroom or not, but it seemed like it.
Mm-hmm.
And God was just putting His hand on me and calling me into this beautiful opportunity to proclaim the gospel to my generation. And I didn't know what that meant. There were only 6 boxes back then, Max. You could be a missionary, a pastor, a youth pastor, a minister of education, and maybe 2 other things. That's all you could be.
Singles pastor.
Yeah,
something
there
like
you
that.
go. There was no box that said you're going to be an entrepreneurial ministry movement leader. So I just took the first step like you and ended up teaching 15 high school kids on Tuesday nights at a church about an hour north of where I'm sitting right now.
Really?
And I drive up there and set the chairs out and preach the gospel and put the chairs back, say goodbye to the kids, drive back, go to college the next day. And, you just follow the Lord step by step. But I'm not where I am. I think it's important for people to hear this, Max, because I knew somebody. I'm not here because something else didn't work out.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not here because, an opportunity arose. I'm here because God called me to be here. And that's different, I think, than, it was a good opportunity and my friend knew somebody and, I did this, whatever. So calling is, I think, the foundation of everything. I want to talk really fast, Max, because we don't have a ton of time, about your book. You say that you write books for people who don't read books. I love that. And I want to ask you to just briefly unpack that for a minute. But you have a new book called What Happens Next, and it is about the end times. And it's really speaking. And I heard you say in an interview a few days ago, someone asked you, do you believe we're living in the end times? And you said, I believe we're living in the end of the end times. And so talk first about writing books for people who don't read books, because you've sold more books than all the people who've written books alive put together, which is amazing. And I just say congratulations again. It blows my mind how God has used you in that way. But what is that about? And then talk a little bit about this particular book. What was the moment when you were like, this is what I'm going to write next?
I do love writing. I loved writing before I was following Christ, and after I became a Christian, I enjoyed writing in seminary classes, and one of my professors said, you ought to consider writing for publication. I thought that was never had even considered that, but the Lord allowed me to do that, and I found a niche Louie, in writing books for people who are not academics,
Gotcha.
people who are not students of Scripture, people who are busy. Maybe they're carpooling, driving a truck, running a business. They have 15 or 20 minutes at most that they can dedicate to some type of spiritual nourishment. And I found that those were the people who were reading my books. I didn't target those people from the beginning, but I just noticed those were the people who would write me notes or talk to me and say, hey, I really liked your book. And I didn't have much time, but I got through 2 chapters last month, and I realized that that's a good group to address. And so I stumbled into that, but that caused me to try to write books that maybe have a few more stories in them than other books do, a little more humor, not so, I don't drill super deep, but I try to get 3 or 4 key nuggets in each chapter that somebody can take home. This particular book, Louie, I got into studying end times, number one, because I'm getting old. I'm not trying to be clever there, but I'm almost 70, and I'm very, very excited. I'm genuinely excited about seeing Jesus. And I mean, I can hear the clock ticking. I didn't sense this when I turned 60.
Wow.
But as I'm turning 70, I think, wow, I may be dead. My dad was in heaven by the time he turned 70. And so that got me curious, and I began reading more about paradise, more about what will happen at the judgment. And then I began formulating some kind of opinions. And the thing I don't like about eschatology, Louie, is that people who work in the world of end times can be so doggone opinionated, you know. And I have one friend, I didn't say it to him, but after he talked to me, I thought he knows more about the return of Christ than Christ does. And so I've kind of stayed out of that field. But then I thought, you know, I do have some thoughts, and I can be decisive and try not to be divisive. And that's what I tried to do in this book, Louie. In the opening, I say we'll all get to heaven and have a good laugh because nobody's got it all figured out. But it is invigorating to explore these topics of the return of Jesus. What is the millennium? Will there be a millennium? What about the rapture? Is there really a rapture? No, there's not a rapture. Yes, there will be a rapture. You know, the descent of Christ back to the earth. And so it seemed to me a sequence was forming in my mind. I put together a timetable, and I preached through it at our church, and it was well received. And so I shared it with our publisher, and next thing I know, I'm writing a book on end times.
Yeah, you talk in chapter 7 about the rapture, and it's interesting, Max. I've been teaching through Revelation for a bit this year, and we've still got quite a ways to go. And so I've been reading a little bit here and reading there, and it's interesting right now, how many people, and I know your book's not all about Revelation, you're taking us on an entire scripture journey to how this whole thing shakes out. Mm-hmm. But a lot of people are teaching Revelation right now, and other people are writing books out of Revelation right now. It seems like everything's Revelation, and I've been shocked, Max. And I don't know how you feel about this, maybe similar to me, how many people currently have changed their position on things like rapture, millennium, in the last few months or year. I'm talking 50-year-old, 60-year-old, 70-year-old pastors, theologians who said, I was that, but now I'm this. I was that, then I was this, but now I've gone back to being this. And I'm like, what are people to do when so many, spiritual leaders are seemingly changing their positions?
Well, they read my book because mine's the definitive answer. Yeah. Well, here's what we all agree on. We agree on the imminent return of Christ in bodily form.
Amen.
We all agree that the dead will be raised, and the saved will be saved, and those who have rejected Christ will endure the consequences of that. Each one of those has subtopics that will generate robust conversations. But I do believe we got to keep the big thing, and we can find healthy fellowship on those big ideas. We all agree Christ is coming back. We all agree the dead will be raised. We all get excited about spending forever in a glorified universe and glorified bodies. And we all can get excited about the fact that we have been saved by grace, and we can be soberly reminded that we're surrounded by people who have rejected Christ, and they will stand before Christ someday and bear the consequence of those decisions. I'm okay with just that short list. I really am. And those big ideas are the foundation upon which we can worship, we can serve,
Yeah.
we can pastor together, we can have different opinions even in the same congregation. And so I'm at total peace with that. And I do not think we should make the millennium or the rapture any kind of test of fellowship. That's way out of line. I do think it's helpful to discuss those topics because they've been discussed for 2,000 years.
Yeah.
And unless Jesus returns, we'll be discussing them between now and when he returns. Let's do so respectfully. Let's do so reverently, acknowledging that only Christ knows. But let's do so vigorously. I found that it animated my faith. I'm one of those who was this and I became that. It animated my faith to re-examine what I had always believed. And so it's a healthy discussion. Let's just not become divisive in the discussion.
What is the takeaway, Max, for, I know it says kind of on the book what the takeaway is, but if we really do get into understanding God's view of how all this is going to play out, what are the 2 or 3 main takeaways that should happen for every single believer?
Thank you. That's a great question. We began our time today talking about anxiety. I believe a major cause of anxiety is lack of understanding about where we're headed as a human race. I remember during COVID, an airlines in Australia made it possible for people, if you paid $2,000, to go up in a plane, circle Australia, and land back where you started. I guess they were really restless. I'm keeping my money in my pocket. I'm not too excited about ending up where I started out. And that's where many people are in the world, especially our younger people. All they see is we're just here going to make a big circle, and that's it. That to me is very distressing, even depressing. And so I would hope that pondering end times excites a person.
Yeah.
It gives them an awareness that this life is brief, it's momentary, but the great life ahead is what awaits us. And then number 2, I would hope we're encouraged. I have been a bit surprised at the number of people who said, I grew up listening to sermons on end times, and I was always so afraid.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, maybe. I probably wasn't paying attention in church enough to get afraid. But I can see how there might have been, probably was, pastoral malpractice. Preachers using end-time sermons to scare people. Well, I don't think, on the cover of the book, I say the end times is not intended to scare us, but just to prepare us, to tell us, here's what's going to happen. And I do think things are going to get darker, but I do believe the Lord is going to rescue his church, and I do believe he's still on the throne. And end time serves to remind us that we serve a mighty God who loves his children, who's doing everything possible to expand the numbers in his flock. And that, to me, is, especially in this day and age, very, very reassuring.
Yeah, so great. What happens next is the book, A Traveler's Guide Through the End of This Age. And obviously the book is reaching a lot of people, Max. I, kind of like to look under the hood, look at the details. And a couple of days after the book had come out, I checked on Amazon, and I don't know, I'm sure it maybe went to number 1 at some point, but it was 2 or 3 or something of all the books that are out there. And I'm like, thank you, Lord, that, at the top of the stack is something that is encouraging people and pointing people to Jesus.
I hope
This
so.
podcast is called the Passion and Purpose Podcast, Max. I want to end by asking you, how do you define purpose? And what is Max Lucado's purpose?
Max Lucado's purpose is message. It's all around the word message. And I define purpose as identifying your strengths and sticking with them for a higher call.
Wow.
So if I know that higher call, I know my unique contribution, find my lane, stay in my lane, I think that's the purpose that we're all called to fulfill.
Okay, so I'm going to ask one more question.
Wait, you've already said, wait. You can't do that.
I got a bonus question. So somebody's going, okay, yes, that sounds so amazing. How do I find my purpose? How do I know what it is that I'm supposed to be doing? Max knows what he's supposed to be doing. Louie seems like he knows what he's supposed to be doing. How do I figure out what I'm supposed to be doing?
What do you love to do, and what do people love for you to do?
Wow.
At the intersection of those two questions, odds are you're getting close to your purpose.
This
What do you
is-
love to do, and what do people love for you to do? Now, by the way, I love to sing, but nobody loves for me to sing. So you got to have answers to both of those. But I think at the intersection of those, the answers to those questions, you'll get close to your purpose.
You know, this is what's amazing about you, is that you can say something in a sentence that might take somebody else an entire book to write. What do you love to do, and what do other people love for you to do? So it's not just up to me to discover my purpose. It's also up to the people around me to help me know what my purpose is. It seems simple enough that we can do what really brings us life and do what really brings life to the people around us. And you did that again today in this conversation, Max. You brought a lot of life to me and to all of us who are listening today. Thank you so much for it. And I'd just like to repeat again here at the end, if you don't have to preach, don't. But if you do have to preach, do. It's the simplest way to put it, and so beautiful and powerful. I appreciate you so much, and I'm really grateful for everything you do, but especially grateful for your willingness to encourage people and encourage me. Thanks for
Thank you,
being
Louie.
on with us today, Max.
Love to all our common friends and your beautiful wife and wonderful team. Thank you so much.
Same love to you guys as well. I can't thank Max enough for joining me on the Passion and Purpose podcast today. If this episode resonated with you, or if God used it to stir something in your heart, share it with a friend, and be sure to continue listening to this season of the Passion and Purpose podcast.